Imagine this. You're doing well at work, maybe even excelling, but you've hit an invisible wall. Your peers are telling you that you're capable of more, and you certainly know there's more that you can do in work and in your life. But something is holding you back. You can chalk it up to being overly cautious, perhaps, wanting to avoid unnecessary risks, or simply not feeling quite ready yet, like there's something else to learn, a piece of knowledge that's missing, you haven't quite found it, but it will complete things in your mind like a jigsaw piece falling into place. But here is the kicker. It's not knowledge holding you back. In fact, it isn't any of the infinite logical answers that will happily spring into your mind. What is holding you back is fear. Fear cleverly disguised as rationale, sensible sounding answers that hide the fear lying beneath them. These false answers secretly sabotage your progress at every turn, redirecting you down unfruitful paths. The pretense that you need to know more about the world serves to block your ability to know more about yourself. Hidden away safely behind the shady mirrors of your mind, these fears and worries lurk where they work away every day of your life, controlling you and blocking you from the freedom that you are seeking by looking for answers externally. Welcome to being a human. And I might add, welcome to the Growth Mindset Psychology podcast with me, Sam Webster. As always, plowing through the science of self-improvement and ruminating on the philosophy of what it means to live a life well lived. Today, we are going on a tour of the 4 hidden fears that secretly sabotage your life. It is going to be a powerful episode that will really teach you a few things about yourself and allow you to build a better form of acceptance and freedom to work towards the big things in your life, the real accomplishments that you do have within you, and to help you bet bigger on yourself. So stay tuned for after the break. So straight up, I will say that most of us genuinely don't think we live in fear. We might notice our phobias, like a fear of heights or a fear of mice, and we can see that it isn't fully logical. But otherwise, we dismiss fear as something irrational, a problem other people deal with. But the truth is that fears are constantly influencing our decisions from behind the scenes. We have an unstoppable force within us that is always seeking safety. And it does that through closeness to others and through holding on to what we have. This means we don't want to risk failure, embarrassment, uncertainty, and sometimes we don't even want to risk success. All of these things can present risks to our current situation. Of course, admitting to being fearful is another weakness and risk to our current situation that could lead to embarrassment. So instead of lying to others about not having any fears when you do have them, which would become very tedious, we have an internal system built inside us to fool ourselves. I'm sure you've met someone at work who offers the odd underhand compliment to subtly undermine others whilst fighting their own internal fear of being less than others. You've probably seen the odd strong guy who resists talking about his emotions and celebrates meat, beer, and football heartily. Yet actually, he's afraid of being seen as vulnerable, hiding uncertainty in his actions. And I can't tell you the amount of people who put on a show about coming across confident. And the thing you'll learn in life is that the people who put on the biggest show about coming across confident are usually the most anxious. In fact, it's often the case that the more strongly held a belief is, that's because we're more scared of it being wrong. Just look at racists and people with other extreme views. They're so scared of losing their privilege and being proven wrong that they have to work themselves up into a snarling show about just how right they are, because they can't possibly even be open to a sensible and logical conversation because they'd risk being wrong. Of course, you aren't like any of those examples, but it's clear to see the actions that these people take are masking their own knowledge of their fears. So let's look at a completely different angle. You could imagine a very sensible person, such as yourself. You wouldn't spend $1,000 on a Mars bar. That would be crazy. A Mars bar is worth $1 to $2. But what if I told you that you are scared of wasting money for no point and scared of appearing crazy? You're scared of telling others that you've made the worst financial decision in history or having to earn back that money. That is fear. If you had to pay that $1,000 for a little Mars bar, the unpleasant sensation of loss you feel inside you, at its root, is fear. We can jump in with our sensible answers like, I know the value of a Mars bar, $1,000 is just wrong, I've earned my money. But ultimately, the reason we protect ourselves, the reason we avoid things is fear. The person that you didn't approach, the opportunity you didn't take, the story you didn't tell, the project you didn't start. As I've said, fears hide behind perfectly reasonable excuses that we're more than happy to believe. And worse still, the fears are rooted in a mindset that is so ingrained into us that we can't even see it. And that is the fixed mindset. Now, I'm sure you know a fixed mindset is the belief that our abilities, intelligence, and traits are set in stone. You are either good at something or you're not. People with a fixed mindset, they avoid challenges, fearing that they'll be exposed as inadequate. They play it safe, seeking validation over growth. And I'm sure you probably don't fully identify with it. In contrast, there is the growth mindset that embraces challenges, the belief that abilities can be developed through effort, learning, and perseverance. With the growth mindset, a failure isn't a measure of our worth, it's a stepping stone to improvement. Growth-minded people lean into discomfort and fear, knowing that's where growth happens. But the problem is, most people genuinely think they are growth-minded when they aren't. Fixed mindset thoughts are like very well-hidden landmines, buried deep within our belief systems. They're ready to blow up our progress when we least expect it. The 4 fears we are about to explore are deeply tied to the fixed mindset, and the reason they are so dangerous is because we believe them to be true, because we believe the fears are real. They are disguised as caution, self-protection, rational decision-making, but in reality, they're holding us back from reaching our full potential. So let's start with the granddaddy of all fears, the fear of failure. It's an evolutionary, sensible fear. Failure in ancient times could mean death, missing out on food, being cast out from the tribe, becoming prey. If you caught a disease or you had an accident, hospitals couldn't exist and you'd likely die. It was worth being cautious. But today, these fears translate into avoiding anything that could make us look incompetent, weak, not good enough. Imagine a talented artist who spends years perfecting his craft but never finishes his portfolio. He's terrified of being rejected by galleries. Every brushstroke brings him closer to judgment, so he stalls. I'm just perfecting my technique, he tells himself, but in reality, it's fear keeping him stuck. And this fear can manifest in people in countless ways. An employee turns down a promotion, fearing they might fail or buckle under pressure. A student sticks to easy courses, terrified of ruining their perfect GPA with one bad grade. An entrepreneur delays launching a product, worrying the market won't embrace it. Failure feels final. It's not just a setback. It's a judgment on your worth. But the thing is that failure is inevitable if you're trying to do anything worth doing. Thomas Edison famously failed 1,000 times before inventing the light bulb. Michael Jordan was cut from his high school basketball team. If failure stopped them, we'd live in a darker world, both literally and figuratively. Of course, it's natural to be worried about failure. And then we have cognitive biases like the negativity bias, which makes everything worse. Our brains are just wired to pay more attention to negative outcomes than positive ones, which makes failure seem scarier than it actually is. But there are ways to overcome it. Firstly, we can reframe failure as learning. Each setback is useful data. What went wrong? How can you improve next time? When you learn to fail fast and fail forwards, you can improve at a very rapid pace. Almost every time you do something for the first time, it will go wrong, and that's life. And it's also great. Now you know how to do it better. No one ever learned to ride a bike through theory. They just got on a bike and fell off a lot. Failure is how you make progress. If you want to hear more about this, the episode on the neuroscience of growth mindset goes deep into the fact that our brain learns the most when we are going through failure. The next way to overcome the fear is to start setting incremental goals. So start small. If you're writing a novel, that can feel overwhelming. Start with writing short stories, submit them to local magazines, and build confidence as you go. If you want a role in leadership, take opportunities for responsibility on small projects, or start a local meetup group, or join a society or local project where you can be responsible for something. An interesting idea is to try visualizing both success and failure. When you prepare for both outcomes emotionally and mentally, it can really reduce the fear and prime you for resilience and what you should do during the failure so you can keep on going. It's of course essential to believe we can succeed, but it's also important to believe that we will be fine if we do fail, and that validates us to take the risk in the first place. It can really help us work on our growth mindset and learn to start embracing challenges, because we can define each struggle as a chance to grow and not as a test of our self-worth. If a salesperson doesn't hit their goals, they can understand the missed target is an opportunity to learn new techniques and ways to improve, so they're more likely to hit the goal in the next quarter. Lastly, an essential part of growth mindset and dealing with failure is seeking feedback and support. Being around others who can see the good in us whilst expecting us to have failures and help us with them can really help us to feel less afraid. An artist can join a group to critique each other's work with constructive feedback. I talk with other podcasters and review each other's shows about what we can improve, and spending time around others where you deliberately aren't expecting to be perfect helps you get comfortable with mistakes. Possibly one of the best courses I ever did in my life for my mindset was a stand-up comedy course. It was 8 weeks long, and each week there'd just be a single 2-hour session in an evening. The biggest part of this course, besides learning some methodologies for making jokes, was getting comfortable with telling bad jokes. Every week as part of our warm-up practice, we had to just tell each other jokes that didn't have a good punchline, and we'd be put in the spot and just made to look stupid. The act of standing in front of 15 people, saying something dumb that wasn't funny, and just being like, oh, I'm okay, not dying, being able to roll with looking incredibly not funny whilst trying to be funny was incredibly powerful, because no one cared that the thing you said wasn't funny, and you don't die, and you can sit there and be weak and worried about it, or you can just stand there confidently and be like, yeah, wasn't funny, was it? And the incredible thing about this is that you can't be funny if you're afraid of not being funny. As a comedian, if you tell a joke that doesn't land, you can make a joke about how unfunny the joke just was, and that's fine. But if you panic, lose track of everything, then your set is over. So honestly, doing a stand-up comedy course is such brilliant exposure therapy for failure and realizing that it doesn't matter. So I would really recommend that if you've ever thought you could be slightly better at telling jokes, or that you secretly harbor a funny side that you just want to let out. Now, as we've said, failure is actually a monster that often we can see, but fear of uncertainty is usually the shadow lurking in the background. This fear whispers in your ear, what am I even doing? What if I can't handle it? What if it isn't as good as I expect it to be? What if, etc., etc. And uncertainty can be described as the silent killer of dreams. Imagine a recent college graduate who gets an offer for a good job in a new city. He's excited, but at the last moment turns it down. The thought of moving to a new place where he doesn't know anyone, doesn't have all the answers, paralyzes him. He convinces himself that staying in his comfort zone is the smart choice. In reality, he's just terrified of the unknown. Our brains are hardwired to avoid uncertainty. In the wild, an uncertain environment meant potential danger, whether from predators, food shortages, hostile tribes, illness. We crave stability, predictability, and control. But life doesn't work that way, does it? Uncertainty is a given in anything that's worthwhile. Starting a business, moving to a new city, asking someone out, or even trying a new hobby. The irony is that avoiding uncertainty doesn't make life safer. It just makes life smaller. Humans genuinely suffer from a cognitive bias called the ambiguity effect, which is where we tend to favor known risks over unknown ones, and this is repeatedly proven by science. It's worth noting that the environment that we grew up in is a big factor. Ironically, a predictable and routine environment as a child often helps us deal with uncertainty as adults because we have a sense of a stable base within us to fall back on. Whereas adults who grew up in unpredictable environments as children, or maybe with unstable households, they can really crave stability and routine and react very aversely to uncertainty. Finally, a huge part of fixed mindset is an external locus of control. People who believe that their fate is controlled by external forces and will blame things like the weather, lack of opportunities in the job market, other people's behavior, etc., as opposed to looking within themselves. They naturally fear going into environments that they don't understand. because as far as they're aware, it's always their environments that cause them problems. This belief makes uncertain situations seem very daunting because they feel so powerless to influence outcomes. When you can internalize your locus of control, that is a really key feature of stoicism and growth mindset. And I'd listened to the episode I did on free will because that's a really good one on this topic, as is the whole season on stoicism I did back in January this year. But at a very simple level, you should focus on what you can control. You can't control the outcome, but you can control your preparation and effort. You can create a good application to a college, but you can't control acceptance rates, for example. Other ways to overcome fear of uncertainty can be practicing mindfulness and staying more present. Often, the fear of uncertainty comes from imagining worst-case scenarios that haven't even happened. As we learned in the Neuroscience of Fear episode, things like meditation and yoga can help reduce activity of the amygdala, which is what alerts us to all of our fears. Another useful habit is to create contingency plans. The act of having a backup plan means you know there is a safety net and can reduce your anxiety. Let's say a wedding couple want to get married outside, but they should have a plan for various weather scenarios. This way, they are prepared for the situation and know they're going to have a day they will enjoy, whatever happens. And if they don't plan for it, there will just be constant anxiety about the weather up until the day itself. Finally, when dealing with uncertainty, we can do things to help ourselves become more certain and gather information. Knowledge does reduce fear. The more informed you are, the less scary the unknown becomes. As long as you don't impulsively keep checking updates of information or endlessly procrastinate to avoid starting something, by spending time investigating the reality of living in a new potential country, for example, you can engage in blogs and podcasts, and that will really help you know if it's for you, as opposed to having an uncertain decision. If you're uncertain about someone you've just met and their ability to be a partner, ask them some deep questions and find out more about them. If you're uncertain about if a different career is worth it for you, try dipping your toe in it and experiencing something part-time so you can make a better decision about it. Maybe it's not fear about if something will work out for you, it's fear about how you will look. And that leads us on to the fear of embarrassment and ridicule. And we will be getting onto that and everything else in the second half of the episode after the break. Again, evolutionary, humans are social creatures. In old times, being ridiculed or ostracized by a group could mean death. Today, that fear has evolved into a crippling anxiety about what other people think of us. In a world where we are constantly online, infinite amounts of people could be thinking about us, although they never are. The fear of ridicule keeps countless people from stepping into the spotlight, sharing their work, or standing up for what they believe in. The amount of people that don't start a YouTube or a podcast because they fear people will look at it is insane. If your podcast or YouTube isn't very good, no one is even looking at it, so there's nothing to be embarrassed about. And the fear of ridicule really holds us back. Imagine a writer who hesitates to publish his work because he isn't fully sure that it's good enough yet. But because he's terrified of what critics will say, he imagines being laughed at, dismissed, or even publicly shamed. So he sits on his manuscript for years, polishing it endlessly but never releasing it. Even though he's written several book drafts at this point, he's never actually published a book. There are plenty of other ways that the fear of embarrassment holds us back. A high school student refuses to join a debate team, afraid she'll be laughed at if she messes up. A corporate employee avoids giving presentations, terrified of making a mistake in front of colleagues and looking incompetent. Ironically, keeping herself incompetent because she'll never learn how to give speeches if she doesn't try. Maybe a musician turns down a big gig, worried about negative reviews. What's wild is that most of the time, people are so wrapped up in their own fears and insecurities that they aren't even paying attention to us. The spotlight effect makes us think that everyone is watching our every move, when in reality, most people are far too wrapped up in their own lives and their own problems to pay that much attention to others. In fact, when people do mess up a little bit or embarrass themselves, we don't judge them that badly. Most of the time, we're pretty understanding and pretty nice when people have something go wrong, and we're happy to help them out. Timothy Armu has a brilliant quote on fear of embarrassment. He says, "It isn't just holding you back, it's quietly stealing opportunities and growth from you every single day." We should remember that embarrassment is such a cheap cost of entry. What's embarrassing is looking back one day when you're old and wrinkly, realizing that you've done nothing. So don't believe those convenient excuses that your mind makes up when you're scared. Just act. Approach someone, try the idea, sing the song, dance the dance. Don't ever let how you look to others hold you back when you should think about how you look to yourself. What are you going to regret not doing when you're old? It's so easy to look back at our fears 10 years ago and see how pointless they were. The person we fancied at high school we could have told, the promotion we could have asked for, the adventure we could have gone on. So what if someone rejects us, or if we don't ace a test, or we don't get into that band? At least give yourself the opportunity. You can't wait for opportunities to arrive at your door, neatly packaged. You have to build a habit of making opportunities for yourself by putting yourself out there. So you can start by trying to build some internal self-confidence. The more you believe in yourself, the less you'll care about other people's opinions. Accepting who you are and really being solid in your own knowledge helps you from allowing it to get polluted by the opinions of others. And I did a really interesting podcast called Social Pressure Personality Disorder, all about the ways that basically every human has a mild disorder due to social pressure and has our lives influenced by others. Definitely worth a listen if you think you have any fear of embarrassment. Another thing you can do is to develop a supportive network around you. Surrounding yourself with people who do uplift you and just offer you constructive feedback rather than criticism is such a useful thing in life. So genuinely do try and seek out and spend time with people who make you feel safe. I have a theory that you aren't actually the result of the 6 people you spend time with, but you are a result of the people you are around in terms of whether they promote and uplift you or whether they prevent your talents and dreams and pull you down. Another thing you can do is challenge your negative thoughts. You can ask yourself, what is the worst thing that could happen? And often the imagined consequences of ridicule are far worse than the real reality. And at this point, I'm starting to annoy myself with how many past episodes I've done that relate to this episode, but this episode is core to all features of a fixed mindset and growth mindset. So on the subject of what's the worst that could happen, I do have an episode on how to stop catastrophizing that is also a really good listen. And I'm going to stop recommending episodes at this point because it's getting ridiculous. Last point on dealing with fear of embarrassment is exposure therapy. Like I mentioned with my stand-up comedy course, leaning into the failure of making bad jokes and potential embarrassment is just so helpful for you to realize there's nothing to be that embarrassed about. If you can gradually expose yourself to situations where you do fear looking bad, whether that's giving speeches or giving people nice compliments about how much they mean to you, we all have different things that make us feel embarrassed, but if we can identify them, we can try and work on them slowly and build them up over time and realize that it's not as bad as we think. It is really worth noting that some of the biggest advances in human history happened from people who are willing to boldly face the fear of ridicule. Galileo faced persecution and ridicule for his support of the heliocentric theory that said the world orbited around the sun, which was against all belief at the time. Darwin faced embarrassment and persecution for stating that humans evolved from apes and weren't shaped directly by the hand of God. Einstein faced ridicule for saying that Newton was wrong about physics and that time can be bent, gravity doesn't quite exist as we understand it, and energy is matter. And sometimes some of the best things that you can do might seem a little bit mad. And on the subject of unexpected madness, the most unexpected fear is the fear of success. It sounds so counterintuitive. Who wouldn't want to be successful? But success comes with its own sets of pressures, responsibilities, and expectations. And there are a lot of people who are more afraid of these problems than they are of failing. Consider a small business owner who has a booming product but refuses to scale. He's terrified that expanding will bring new problems like hiring more staff, dealing with supply chain issues, losing control of his company. So he deliberately doesn't risk it. He keeps his business small, even though it could be something much bigger. Fear of success often stems from imposter syndrome, the belief that you aren't really deserving of your accomplishments and that any minute now you could be exposed as a fraud. It also comes from the fear of change. Success means new responsibilities, new challenges, and sometimes new enemies. Historically, success and achieving a higher status would attract jealousy and rivalry, which brings with it new threats. Even today, any online creator that gets quite big ends up having a base of people who seem to just want to destroy their career and can't help but point out something terrible that they've done. We find it hard to believe that people who are successful have problems and can often deny them support and only spend time tearing them down. Humanity aside, there are some interesting lessons from development psychology here on the fear of success. Early experiences of conditional love or approval where the affection was based on performance can create a fear of success because individuals might fear that their success will lead to higher expectations and the potential loss of approval if they can't maintain it. They might also have had a parent or sibling who undermined them when they did well. If your big sister always bullies you for doing better than her and embarrasses you for being a nerd who cares too much about work and isn't cool, then you can develop a very legitimate fear against doing your best. It's not just siblings that can do this to people. Sometimes even parents can feel threatened by their kids being better than them and then subconsciously start to sabotage them. It is rare, but it does happen. So all that to say that there are some very real reasons for the fear of success, and you aren't crazy to have them in the slightest, but the only person these fears are now holding back is you. So you still need to overcome them. And firstly, perhaps the most important thing to do is to actually define success on your own personal terms. I constantly talk about this because people often don't even know what success means to them. So it's really worth journaling or doing a mind map on what does success mean to you. Is it money, freedom, happiness? Clarify what your vision is and stop worrying about expectations from society. Someone that owns a business might want to actually put more time into pushing their ability to have a better work-life balance rather than to push the amount of profit that they make. A musician might want to focus on creative enjoyment rather than accolades. It really depends upon you. As I say, for some people, wanting a Lamborghini could be a very toxic goal, but for others, it's perfect. So you need to get comfortable with your goals so at least you know what you really genuinely want to achieve and have done with your life, with yourself. You can be honest with yourself about the success you want to aim for. That means every time you deny yourself an opportunity for success, you know what you're doing. You can see it happening and start to work to improve it. Next, you need to start preparing for success. Not just dreaming about it, but planning for it. What would the success look like? How would you handle it? And how would you get there? An athlete can prepare for the demands of increased media attention and sponsorship deals that come with winning a major competition. And yes, there are bad sides about success, and you should look at what they are. All decisions have downsides. If you want a pony, as they say, you still have to shovel shit. By understanding all the drawbacks behind a potential success, that means you can start removing the fears of uncertainty you have and plan for dealing with the threats that come with success so you can handle them better. Maybe you have a fear of intimacy and you might want to pull back as a relationship levels up. You can learn to become comfortable being known deeply and accepted as you are, because actually we are all a bit weird. And that leads on to my next point about addressing imposter syndrome. We really need to understand that everyone feels like a bit of a fraud sometimes. The key is just to push through the feeling and keep moving forwards. No one was brought up with some divine shining light telling them what they're going to do. They just make stuff up as they go along and are quite surprised to find themselves where they are now. Honestly, no one knows what they're doing. I've spoken to billionaires, used about how to make their headphones work, surprised about how to answer a question or what to do with their lives. They're all just people bumbling along, and they get as surprised as anybody else does about the different consistencies of their poo on a day-to-day level. It's a weird and surprising, wonderful world to be a human, and it's fine. Lastly, if you do want to investigate and address some of your underlying fears, it is totally cool to seek therapy, which can really help explore and remove past experiences that contribute to your fear of success. This certainly isn't a therapy advert, just saying it's actually really fascinating. I'm currently in therapy at the moment, and I'm enjoying it so much finding out about the different fears I have related to ADHD and other things in my life, because I've always been quite shy and timid and have never liked to cause a scene, or I struggle to really use volume or shout. And doing things like bestowing lots of compliments on people or just standing up and telling stories about myself and trying to look good really don't come natural to me at all in the slightest. Genuinely, one of the reasons I've been doing the podcast is subliminally to start giving myself more of a voice, to be able to make sense and explain all the different things going on in my mind to others, because I always had a ton of ideas. I just struggled to actually explain them. So the chance to use therapy myself to start digging into these things again has been really fascinating, and I only have good things to say about it. Anyway, on the subject of failure, you do need to just do stuff and accept that you are a work in progress. And you'll find that ironically, you'll do 10 times better than when you try to protect yourself and try to appear better than you are. The truth is that the things we fear the most are often the things that will help us grow the fastest. Fear is actually a signal. It's pointing us towards the very areas where we need to lean in. And in fact, they are not the places to be backing away. The irony is that the more we run from our fears, whether that is fear of failure, uncertainty, embarrassment, or fear of success, the more that we run from them, the more we shrink our lives. But the good news is that once you recognize the fears that you have, you can start to face them head on. You can reframe them as opportunities for growth rather than barriers. You don't have to be fearless as such. You just need to be brave enough to move forwards one step at a time despite the fear. I will just mention the episode just before this one on the neuroscience of fear that was specifically about all the biology and chemistry behind fear that's going on in your mind and how you can actually physically change the workings of your mind to help reduce your levels of fear and anxiety at a day-to-day level. And these two episodes are built to go together. It was just a bit too long to put them all into one episode. So I know I said I would stop talking about past episodes, but I did have to mention that one. Okay. If you enjoyed the show today, or you've been getting things out of the show in general and you feel like supporting me, or you want to access ad-free episodes or ask me questions, then you can support the show by clicking the link in the description. Go to the Growth Mindset Premium show on Supercast. Of course, you can always help the show by sharing the episode with a friend or dropping a hot review. I also really do enjoy meeting my listeners and learning what's going on in your minds, so you can book a free call with me on Wednesday afternoons to chat about mindsets or anything else. And on that, enjoy the weekend or whatever day it is that you're listening to this. Remember that the next time you feel fear rearing up inside you, don't run from it. You can lean into it, because that is where the magic happens. That is where growth lives. You are totally awesome and you have got this. Thank you so much for listening.
Go you!
Your consistency to reach the end of an episode is legendary.
My hero!
But when we learn things, it's important to reflect. So I politely invite you to take a pause, rifle through the biggest ideas you just heard. So here's your opportunity to hit pause and have a think. Okay, did you wrestle with some insights? Information doesn't stick when we race from one podcast to the next without using our brain to play with the knowledge. So here's another go at a pause. Alrighty, I'll let you off to continue with your life now. If you have any ideas or feedback for the show, I'm always interested to hear from you.
You're the best!
And other than that, please stay curious. Curious. Growth. Smiling for no reason.